Don't they say, looking back is wonderful? When you look back, you can see everything so clearly. Impossible coincidences that were actually carefully laid plans. Small inconsistencies that you never noticed. Sometimes it's just an accidental slip of the tongue. Looking back, I see that the troubles in my life began when I was 18. My ex-girlfriend Sarah called me one day and invited me to a party. Did I smell a rat? Of course not. We parted as friends, so why should I suspect anything untoward? The party was fun with a lot of our mutual friends, and a girl I'd dated before seemed to have a crush on me a couple of times. Georgina was quite pretty, maybe in fact a little above my class. I have no illusions, I don't look very good. But Georgie, as she liked to be called, definitely gave me credit. At 6'3", she was very slender with boobs that seemed to be just the right size for her height and weight. She didn't look too heavy, and her butt, which she could barely squeeze into those jeans, was something to die for. Well, the problem with taking them off later in the evening in my car was incredible. But she did, and that night I had the best sex of my life. Okay, it was in the back seat of my car, and there wasn't much room to maneuver. We did this over and over again. Honestly, I thought all my Christmases came at once. Georgie was insatiable, and over the next 6 months convinced me that I was the greatest lover in the world, and the only man she had ever loved. I was, of course, completely besotted by her. So on our 6-month anniversary, we had our own party to announce our engagement, and I gave her a $1,500 engagement ring. A year later, we got married, and 10 months later, baby number 1 was born, my son Marcus. And about a year later, almost exactly a year later, baby number 2 was born, Ellie. It took Simone a little longer, but after we had her, we decided that the family was already big enough, and Georgie started taking pills. At that time, I was working in my father's transport business. But Dad got a little tired and started talking about retirement. My brother Bob and I had to make difficult decisions. Bob was more interested in incorporating the business into one of the big remote franchises, while I preferred the idea of remaining independent. I introduced self-loading flat trucks equipped with high-ab loader cranes when they first became popular, and I knew the company had to go down this path. Eventually, Bob and I split up the company. He had most of the yard, warehouse, and storage space. But I had a section of the yard to park my trucks and a workshop to look after them, although I had my 3 trucks upgraded to new Scanias, so most of the servicing was done by this company. Life was good for a while. Georgie and I had a wonderful new detached house in a new building. The garden wasn't that big, but modern houses don't have gardens at all. However, we managed to squeeze a small pool in there. I drove my Range Rover and Georgie drove her BMW. Georgie didn't have enough money. God, how can a girl spend money like it's water? Money was the only thing we ever argued about. But we argued about them often. Georgie couldn't figure out how much we were getting on paper and how much we had to spend on what. She saw the money the trucks brought in, but couldn't understand what it cost. Fuel and wages, not to mention taxes, insurance, and vehicle maintenance. Basically, I thought everything in the garden would be covered in roses, and I planned to increase my fleet of trucks. I gained some notoriety in the equipment delivery business, as my trucks were often able to unload and place cargo without the need to hire a separate crane. I stayed away from Arctic semi-trailers, as small trucks could often drive right through the factories we were delivering to. The downside of running a small trucking company was that I was on the road a lot, either driving or looking for clients. The first clue that something was wrong was when my oldest was 8 years old. I came home to find 3 children's life jackets hanging in my garage. Of course, I was curious since I didn't have a boat, but it turned out that good old Roger, who lived across the road, had a boat. And apparently, Roger and his wife took Georgie and the kids for a walk along the river, just in case Georgie threw life jackets on the children. I thought it was quite extravagant for a one-time event. But I soon learned that this was not a one-time event. All of this became commonplace throughout the summer. Roger and Betty bought their home not long after we did. Roger was about 5 centimeters taller than I was, about 70 meters, but he seemed lean. Betty was the same height as Georgie, but she had a completely different build. Some might call her curvy, but I always thought she was just overweight. She filled the swimsuit to the limit, if you know what I mean. Oh yeah, a swimsuit? Well, during the summer months they would come and use our pool with us quite often. Some other neighbors did the same. Hey, a couple of the other wives had figures that made the open pool policy a good idea. It seemed to me that Georgie put them all to shame, and judging by the looks on their husbands' faces, I was not alone in this. I don't know when I first heard my daughter call Roger Uncle Roger. Looking back, I realize this should have raised alarm bells. But a few weeks later, I came home early one morning to find that Georgie and the children were not at home. Betty was working in her front garden, so I walked over and asked her if she knew where my wife and children had gone. Betty always knew everything. They are on a boat with Roger. They love being on the boat, and Roger loves children. You know we can't have our own. And besides, this is company for him. To be honest, I can't stand swimming and only swim with him when no one is there. Ding ding, alarm bells were actually ringing at this moment. You see, on the one hand, the children had to be in school. And secondly, over the past 6 months, my sex life has changed for the worse. For some reason, Georgie went from being a sex bomb in bed to being a once-a-week-if-I'm-lucky wife. This had happened a couple of times before during our marriage. In the past, it had only lasted a couple of months, but this time it was much longer. In fact, just before Georgie started going out on Roger's boat with the kids. How often does Roger go out on the boat, Betty? Oh, 2 or 3 times a week. I'm glad Georgie likes the boat. Although 1 day a week is enough for me, they just go down and mess with it. Now Georgie is just clinging to the boat. Damn sure it is, I thought. It's one thing for your wife and children to go out on a boat with a neighbor and his wife, but it's a completely different matter if they are alone and she doesn't tell her husband about it. I think I was in a daze as I walked towards my house. You can imagine what was going on in my head, right? I had an uneasy feeling that she could and did, from complete trust to complete doubt, in just one conversation with your neighbor. I wonder how many times this has happened to people in the past. Surely Betty must have doubts when her husband leaves with a woman as beautiful as Georgie, but she seems to trust Roger completely. Later, I saw Roger and Georgie return. Roger stopped, and they got out of the car to greet Betty. While they were chatting, I saw Georgie suddenly turn around and look at our house. I put my Renji in the garage so she wouldn't notice I was home. The conversation continued for several minutes, Georgie looking at the house, then returning to Betty and talking again. Georgie then walked up to the house. I was sitting in the living room when she came in, pretending I didn't see her arrive. "Hey, baby," she smiled as she walked through the door. "You're early. Could you pick up the kids from school for me while I prepare dinner? Maybe since you're home, we can go out later." I didn't answer her. I just got up and went out to the garage to get my car, deciding to drive it. I arrived at school early as it was obvious that Georgia had reserved time to shower and change before she went to pick them up. Sending me out of the house gave her time to clean up the mess. "Is there something wrong?" she asked me that night at dinner. "I don't think so. Why should anything be wrong? Oh, it seemed to me that you were cold with me today. The cunning creature caught me while the children were present. I was going to leave it until they were in bed. Why did you do something that should make me angry? What are you suggesting? Just answer, Georgie. You started this conversation." "Well, you're in a bad mood." "Maybe I'm tired. I've had a tough week." "Well, don't upset me and the children just because things aren't going well at work." We finished our meal in silence. Well, she was between Georgia and me. The children had a lot to talk about. Later that night, when the kids were already asleep, I tackled Georgie. "Okay, Georgie, what's the big idea? What are you talking about now?" "You and Roger, alone in this damn boat. That's what I'm talking about. You are my wife. You should not go out on bloody boats with another man. You've never said anything about this before. Why are you so upset now?" "Because you always made me think Betty was with you. I never realized you were alone with Roger. He teaches me how to drive a boat and take care of it. What's bad about it? My God, woman, you are my wife. And what does this have to do with it? Listen, you are my wife, and Betty is his. We do everything together with you, and he has to do everything with Betty. That's how it has to be, and that's the end of it. You won't go on a boat alone with Roger again, understand? I understand, but it's stupid. Roger is just a friend. I bet, I thought to myself, that night Georgie tried to kill me with sex. Great, yes, almost as good as our first night in my car all those years ago. But didn't she feel guilty? This was what I asked myself. I decided to find out everything. The next morning I hired a temporary driver for my truck. He was a nice guy and I have used his services quite often in the past. He lent me his car and I positioned myself where I could watch the entrance to our house. Georgie came out and took the kids to school, then went shopping, and then home again, where she stayed until it was time to pick up the kids. The next day was the same, but on the third day, when she was leaving the estate, Roger's car drove out behind her. I followed them to school, and then to the supermarket, where Georgie got into Roger's car, and they drove to his boat. From the road, I watched as they walked up to the boat, holding hands, and climbed on board. Several minutes were spent in a fuss. Roger was filling up the water tank again, and Georgie was making a drink. Coffee, I think. After drinking it in the sun, they both disappeared below. Leaving the car on the side of the road, I climbed over the fence and headed towards the boat. As I got closer, I heard sounds that were familiar to me. Georgie screams very loudly during sex. I learned everything I needed. I boarded very quietly, although I suppose I didn't need to be too quiet while Georgie was screaming in the cockpit. But if I rocked the boat, they might have realized I was on board. I carefully pushed the bolt on the cabin door and closed the lock. Then he climbed back up and unfastened the cables, pulling the boat to the shore. A gentle push, and she went with the flow. Things didn't go quite as I had hoped. It would have been fun if they had drifted to the catch chain in front of the dam before they knew they were adrift. But the boat immediately collided with the next boat, and they must have heard or felt it. I was walking along the shore near the boat and saw that Georgie and Roger had noticed me through the cabin window. Then I heard them knocking on the hatch door, trying to get out. It was at that moment that I left them. I picked the kids up from school and we ate at the diner when Georgie got home. "You could have killed us," was the first thing she said to me. "We could have fallen over the dam and died." That would be good. But unfortunately, they put a chain there to keep the boats from doing that. "You're a bastard! You ruined Roger's boat. It would have been scratched if it had been on the chain, and he had to break down the door so we could get out of the cabin. Oh, did I ruin his boat? Does it matter to him since he destroyed our marriage? What the hell are you talking about? We didn't do anything we weren't supposed to do in that cabin." I laughed out loud. "Georgina, when you copulate, you make more noise than a siren. Don't try to sell me any of this crap, but I would advise discussing everything without the presence of children. We'll leave it until after they're in bed, right? Then where is my dinner?" I just looked at her. She understood everything and went rummaging through the refrigerator to sort out her own food. Later, after putting the children to bed, Georgie came into the living room where I was sitting. I think she really realized that she was well and truly caught, but I thought that I would try to get out. "Alan, I don't know what you think, saw, or heard, but there is nothing between Roger and me. You just misunderstood, that's all. If you walked into the cabin, you would see that we were just drinking coffee." Wow, I've heard it called different words, but never coffee drinking. "Stop it, Georgina. Roger copulated with you, and you know I know it. How long has it been since he kneaded the cake for me? Isn't it from the moment you started playing hard to get?" "What do you mean, build hard to touch?" "Georgie, our sex life became an imitation a few months ago, haven't you noticed? You got everything elsewhere, didn't you? And I have a bad feeling that Roger isn't the first guy you've had since we've been married. I just can't understand why Betty put up with this." She couldn't help but know what was going on. "You are crazy. There's nothing between me and Roger. We are just good friends." I managed to control my anger, but when she continued to deny that she was Roger's whore, I found myself starting to lose control. I really wanted to hit the woman, but something stopped me. I guess it's just not my style. Well, I still needed to hit someone, so I ran out of the house and went over to Roger's house. The door opened with the first knock. Roger was just getting up from his chair in his living room when I walked into the room. Don't ask me how many hits I hit because I won't be able to answer, but I ruined Roger's face, and between us, I'm sure I ruined his living room. The strangest thing was that Betty was just standing in the doorway and looking at us. She didn't cry or scream, and I'm damn sure she wasn't the one who called police. But as a result, I ended up in a cell and Roger in the hospital. I ended up in prison. Not on the charge of grievous bodily harm to Roger, although he was also charged with that. No, for attempted murder when he untied the boat. They tried to imprison them because the boat could cross the dam and kill them. But I was lucky. After 4 weeks, all charges were dropped, apparently due to lack of evidence, and I was released. However, Georgina filed for divorce and a restraining order was issued to keep me away from my home. Georgina received full custody of the children, and for a while it looked like she was going to get the house as well, until a neighbor contacted my brother and told him that Roger had moved in with Georgina. After that, everything became very difficult, expensive, since the paper lawyers made a mint out of me. The house had to be sold, although my cross-petition citing adultery was trumped in court. Other boat owners heard Georgina's lustful scream while they were on the boat. After the divorce was settled, Georgina moved into another house with Roger, taking my children with her. He and Roger managed to get a restraining order to keep me away from that house. So my so-called playdates with the kids were extremely difficult to arrange. In fact, there were none. When Georgina had to take them to the family center to see me, one of them kept suddenly seeming to fall ill. I discovered that Betty knew what was going on all along, but for some reason she was waiting for me to catch them so she could leave Roger without much difficulty. And I made another discovery that later changed the way I looked at my life with Georgie. Roger was a very rich man. It cost him nothing to buy a new house, leaving Betty the old one. I thought I would force Georgina to give me access to my children by threatening not to pay child support. But when I made this threat on the phone, she said, "So what? Roger wants the children to be his, and he will happily support them." And the damn bastard did it. Although I'm not stupid, I paid child support into my children's investment accounts. My brother managed the accounts so that the children would have some money when they grew up. I hope someday they will understand how much I love them and miss them. Despite my best efforts, I never saw my children after the night Roger and I fought. I never had a single letter or postcard from them. Every time I tracked down the phone number they live on, it changed quickly. In this regard, some smart people usually say that the courts are concerned with having access to your children, to which you are entitled. My answer to this question is that I, like many other estranged husbands, can only wish for it. One day, sometime after the divorce, I was in a pub where I ran into Sarah and her husband. When I told her my story, she turned white as a sheet and had to run into the ladies' room where she threw up. I asked why my troubles affected her so much, and she told me how I was invited to this party. She suddenly realized that Georgina was using her to get to me, and here's why. We thought it was most likely my father's transport business. Sarah said that when they were younger, Georgina always joked that she was going to marry for money. Of course, when they were teenagers, everyone laughed about it, and Sarah didn't think about it when Georgina asked her to invite me to that party. But when I said Roger had a lot of money, she realized Georgie had just jumped ship. To put it bluntly, Georgina found a richer mug. Combine that with Betty saying Roger was shooting blanks but wanted kids, and all the pieces fell into place nicely. The house had to be sold because there was a division of family property that had to be settled. I also sold 2 of my 3 trucks to my brother, cheap. I left the third one, which I drove myself. My home currently is a large trailer parked in a transport yard, but I'm rarely there. I travel around the UK and Europe delivering equipment to my clients, only returning to Reading periodically. Damn, I thought as I walked back to my truck. Some bastards were snooping around my damn cargo. I stopped at a gas station on the freeway to get something to eat. I usually don't eat at gas stations because the food is of questionable quality and too expensive. But I was pressed for time on this trip and didn't find a convenient roadside cafe that was open at that time of night. While I was out of the car, someone rummaged under my tents. the tarpaulins with which we cover the cargo, I could see that several tie-down ropes had been unfastened. Whoever it was wasted their damn time because the cars in my back were too big for anyone to carry. So, after checking that the tie-down straps were still holding the load securely, I started tying up the awning again. When I did, I saw a guy walking around among the other trucks, looking like he had lost something. "Is there a problem, Squire?" I asked, as he approached me. I thought it might be whoever was sniffing around my truck. If I talk to him, he'll realize I've noticed him, and will probably leave the other trucks and trailers alone. "Have you seen the blonde here, buddy?" "About 60 meters, black skirt and white top." "No, I didn't see anyone. I just left the cafe. Have you lost her?" "Yes, we had a fight, and the stupid little bitch ran away from me. I thought she came this way." With these words, the guy left. But then a thought struck me, and before I tied the last rope of the awning, I lifted the edge of it and looked under it. There were two of the bluest eyes I've ever seen, looking right at me. A quiet voice pleaded, "Please don't tell him I'm here." Damn, that was the most beautiful face I've ever seen. Why she was hiding, I didn't care. If she wanted to get away from this guy, I wasn't going to refuse her request. "Okay, but you have a long ride in the cold. I won't stop until I get to Plymouth." "I'm fine with that, as long as I get away from him," she whispered back. "Hold on, beauty. We're leaving." I left the petrol station and returned to the M5 motorway. I wondered what was the matter. Why was this young mystery running away from the guy? The only thing I could come up with was that maybe he was her pimp or something. But from what I saw, she didn't look like a prostitute, and I felt like he wasn't the type to be a pimp either. I can't say that I liked his appearance, but he seemed more like a traveling salesman or a businessman to me. He might have picked her up hitchhiking, thinking he'd get lucky, and she didn't want to play. But if that was the case, why didn't she just go to the restaurant? There are too many people there for him to be impudent with her. 3 hours was too long to stay under that tarp, and it wasn't very warm that night. So after about 40 minutes, I turned onto the slippery road, stopped in the emergency lane, and let her out from under the tarp. She looked frozen. "Okay, Riddle, jump into the cabin. You'll soon warm up there." She looked at me strangely, and I realized that my statement could be understood in two ways. "Come on, get moving, girl. I can't leave you standing here alone at this time of night. Anything can happen to you. Now go. I don't have much time." She looked a little worried, but without saying anything, she climbed into the cabin. I headed back onto the M5, checked my watch, and thought that with any luck, I would be almost on time for the delivery. The mystery soon warmed up in the cabin. She leaned against the passenger door and looked at me as if she was falling asleep. She was quite a beautiful girl, about 20 years old, I would say. Thin by most people's standards, but that was the fashion. "If you're tired, girl, crawl into bed and take a nap. We'll be driving for another couple of hours or so." She gave me another questioning look. "Come on, girl. You're safe. I have to drive the damn thing, don't I?" She seemed to think about it for a few minutes, and then said, "Thank you. I'll do that if you don't mind. I'm completely broken." She climbed into the bunk behind the seats and covered herself with the blanket I kept there. Very quickly, she found herself in the realm of sleep. About 3 hours later, I arrived at the plant where I was delivering the equipment. The mystery didn't move as I drove the truck straight into the building. I almost forgot about it as I removed the cover and straps from the load, and then watched as the guys pulled out the 3 cars I was hauling. After more than 20 minutes, the truck was empty. After I assembled my awning and folded it, I took the truck out to the factory yard with the intention of laying my head down for a few hours. I needed to register a legal break that I was supposed to have after driving for most of the day. Then I remembered that my bunk was occupied by a mystery. Having climbed into the cabin, I saw that she was completely unconscious. She didn't even move as I lowered the top bunk above her. A rather noisy and complicated operation, pressed the button to close the electric curtains, and climbed up. It must have been around noon when I woke up to the sounds of the Riddle sobbing quietly in the bunk below. I waited a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do with this young lady. God, how should I behave in such situations? I couldn't just drop her off somewhere. I would always be tormented by the thought of what happened to her. She had nothing with her except a small purse and no spare clothes. I climbed out of the bed, and I felt that she was watching me, just as I was doing. "Hungry?" I asked. "Yes, very," she answered. There were still tears in her voice. "Factory toilets are only through this entrance. The second door on the right is the ladies' room. Go and wash yourself. You fucking ruined your makeup. Then we'll go and find something to eat." When she climbed out of the bed, I saw a pair of beautiful legs all too clearly. Her short skirt rode up higher than was appropriate, but I don't think she noticed. 10 minutes later, she returned. Her makeup was fresh, but her clothes were ruined, showing signs that she had slept in them. I washed myself in the sink on the side of the truck and changed into clean overalls. She didn't say anything while we walked down the road to a nearby cafe, but there she showed me that for her small size, she could sweep away a significant amount of food. "So, Little Miss Mystery," I said when we had finished eating, "will you tell me who you are and what happened last night?" She looked at me thoughtfully for several minutes. "For what? Why? Why do you want to know this?" "I'm nothing to you. Just someone you gave a ride to." "Stop it. I give hitchhikers a ride. And you were hiding in my truck from someone. It says you have some kind of problem and I need to know what it is. I don't want to read in the newspaper that you were found dead in a back alley somewhere. So, Riddle, come on, tell me in detail. You don't know if I can't help." "He's my brother," she said, as if that was all I needed to know. I continued to sit with an expectant expression on my face. "Well, actually, my half-brother. My parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Jeff is 8 years older than me. He raised me." "So why did you run away from him?" I felt like I had just asked a stupid question. She was a hot young woman. It could be that her brother was bullying her. "Jeff is a businessman." "Well, he thinks so. He never had a proper job that I know of. He buys and sells things. He always has something important in his work. I don't know, he always spends money like he has a lot of it. But there are always unpaid bills at home and we had to move a lot. I think he was running away from his debts." Riddle fell silent again, and her eyes looked at the half-empty mug of tea in front of her. I had the feeling that she really didn't want to talk anymore. Then, it seems to me, she suddenly changed her mind. "He had a debt to some man and he couldn't pay it off. The guy wanted me to work some percentage. Do I need to tell you how?" "No, I think I can guess. I told my brother that I wouldn't do this. God. This guy is an old man and I never—" Her voice faded and she began to cry again. I signaled to the waitress to bring me a couple more mugs of tea. "What should I do now? I have no one I can turn to." "Nonsense, girl. You've already contacted me, haven't you?" She looked at me with a blank expression on her face. "Look, Riddle, I'm a truck driver, like my dad before me, and I think my dad's dad drove a damn horse and cart or something. Either way, being on the road is in my blood. Do you know what they used to call truck drivers a few years ago? I'll say, Knights of the Road." "Okay. Now there aren't many people who are still from the old school, but you accidentally chose one of her. Riddle, you're in trouble. I will do everything in my power to help you. You just have to decide what you want to do." "I can't go back to Jeff. He will want me to go to that man. I know that." "Then don't go back to him. Let's see what alternatives we have. You can get a job and live on your own, right? But where will I stay during this time? I only have a couple of pounds. Have you ever worked in a hotel?" "No. The only job I've ever had is in stores. But I'm ready to try everything." "Well, I know a couple of people in Torquay who have a small hotel. Their daughter used to help run the place, but she left for university last month. They complained that they could not find anyone suitable to replace her. I don't think they can pay too much. That's probably why they had problems. But you will have everything ready so you will not have any expenses. Do you think they will accept me? I don't know anything about hotels." "Oh, yeah. I'm sure Mac and Jenny will accept you. Maka is from the same old school of chauffeurs as me. But they will want the costs to be worth it. You know, in a small hotel, you have to be a jack of all trades, working all the damn hours, you know? I don't mind, and I'm learning quickly." "Okay, sit still. I'll call them." I went to the payphone and called, and Jenny answered. I told her how it all happened, and she said that I should bring the riddle to them as soon as possible. She would serve breakfast in the morning. When I told Riddle about this, I saw the first real smile on her face since I met her. I really wish I was a few years younger, but I knew she was about 20, and I was 38, almost old enough to be her father. We were unable to leave Plymouth until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as I had to take a break from work before I could drive again. So we went to the nearest supermarket, which fortunately had a clothing section. The riddle had nothing but the clothes she was wearing, 2 hours and a couple of £100 from my credit card. Later, we took a taxi back to the truck. I almost had to force Riddle to let me buy her clothes. I realized that she felt like she was being courted. She insisted on taking the bill because she wanted my money back. To be honest, I didn't really expect this because I knew she wouldn't make much money at Maka's hotel. Listen, I don't need money. Since my wife left me, taking the children with her, I have nothing to spend them on. She and her boyfriend never demanded alimony, although I offered it. No, they drove a damn wedge between me and my children. The bloody family courts didn't do anything to help me get the access I should have had to my children. Now they won't recognize me even if they run into me on the damn street. One day they might find out about the money I saved for them, but I doubt they'll ever know how much I missed them and cared about them. As I drove from Plymouth to Torquay, Riddle said her name was Ashley Gordon, although I continued to call her Riddle. I learned that she was actually 22 years old, and from what she said, it was clear that until last night, when he pushed her too far, she was completely under the influence of her brother. I really don't think she ever thought for herself before that night. But now that she knew it, she tried her best. Mac and Jenny were impressed with her. We arrived just as they were preparing dinner. The mystery immediately rushed to the kitchen and busied itself with the vegetables. I left them to do the cooking, and I settled down comfortably for a while in the living room. A little later, while the food was being prepared, Jenny took Riddle to her room to get settled. Mac and Jenny then joined me in the living room. I didn't have much time as I had to get back on the road for a trip across the country to deliver the next load. "Where did you pick up this riddle, Al?" asked Mac. "What do you mean by riddle?" Jenny interrupted. "Oh, there used to be a lot of them," Mac told her. "They hang out in roadside cafes most of the night, looking for a lift somewhere, anywhere. The mystery is where they come from and where they go. They are most likely on the run. At that time, there were very few highways, and from the moment they left the city, they could disappear forever. I believe that most of them ended the game when they reached the big city." "You're overly trusting, Al, just like your father. You couldn't risk anything happening to her, could you? Ashley made you think about your daughters, didn't she?" said Mac. "Mac knew about me and my troubles. He was my father's friend before he died. God, I hope my daughter never finds herself in the same situation that Riddle found herself in. Do you know what her brother wanted from her? The bastard planned to turn her into a prostitute. God knows where she would have ended up if he had had his way." "Well, don't worry. We'll take care of her," Mac said. "Jenny, you better warn her about the guests. Some clients have a gift for talking. I think the fact that she ran away and hid in Al's truck shows that she's not the dumb blonde that her brother thought she was. I think she knows how to keep womanizers away from her, but if necessary, I'll put in a word," Jenny assured me. I said goodbye and resumed my journey around the country. Before leaving, Riddle hugged me and thanked me. It was a gentle hug. I felt as if I was being hugged by my daughter. In fact, this was the first time she touched me. It was nice, and I wondered what I had missed with my own daughters. A month passed before I saw the three of them again. I planned to spend the weekend at the hotel, so I dropped off the load on Friday afternoon and parked the truck in the designated lot. At that time, this was the location in Torquay where the bus station is located today. I parked and paid for the weekend, then took a taxi to the hotel. When I arrived, Mac and Jenny were missing, and there was only one Riddle at the front desk. When I walked through the door, she ran up to me, hugged me, and kissed me as if I was her long-lost brother. When Mac and Jenny returned, the Riddle barely left my side for most of the time I was there. Except when I went to bed. I began to think that Mac would be annoyed by this, since there was going to be a lot of work to do. but Jenny said that Zagata hasn't taken a single day off since she arrived. She said she would take time off when I arrived. For me, it was a change in routine. Usually when I visited Mac and Jenny, I would just relax in the hotel lobby. But this time, Riddle and I looked around the city. While showing me around the city, Riddle was hanging on my arm, like she thought I might get lost or something. Apparently, she liked showing me around, so I didn't say that I had known this city for several years. I noticed some funny looks in my direction, I suppose, because, although I was only 38, next to the Riddle, I looked like an old man. It turned out that the Riddle assigned me the status of a father. So from then on, I played this role carefully. Obviously, her brother was her father before, but he let her down badly. Since she was now counting on me, I intended to give her the support she needed. At the same time, I would like to be 15 years younger. I developed strong feelings for the girl. The weekend went by too quickly, but when it was all over, I decided that I would change my routine and spend more weekends in Torquay. In the UK, driving hours, rest periods, and mandatory 2-day, 48-hour weekend breaks are strictly enforced. With no reason to spend weekends at home, I tended to stay at a number of places with friends around the country on a rotating basis. The fact that there is a mystery in Torquay was the reason for coming there. I felt the need. It was something I hadn't felt in a long time. The only problem was that when I could get to Torquay, it all depended on what kind of cargo I was carrying. I probably got lucky once a month. But my weekend with Riddle was extremely happy. I wanted to make the most of them, because Zagata was a very attractive young lady, and I knew that one day she would like some young stud. It must have been almost 6 months after Riddle hid in my truck when I received a message to call Mac urgently. He said that Riddle's brother showed up at the hotel, and she was very worried. Mac got rid of him, but suspected he would return. Tracking down Brother Mystery wasn't as difficult as I thought. I knew the general area in which he operated. The guy had quarreled with many people and accumulated so many bad debts that quite a few people were following him. I took a few people I knew to meet him, and we had a nice chat. He assured that he would not bother Riddle anymore. Leaving the city, we dropped him off at the hospital, but for a long time he still did not bother anyone. He must have gotten into an argument with the wrong person somewhere, because a year or so later he was found dead in a back alley. Yes, I paid for his cremation and drove Riddle there in Mac's car. Quite a few more years passed. I think I was 52, when Mac and Jenny decided it was time to retire. The mystery had by then turned the small hotel into a work of art. I don't know how this topic came up, but when I was talking to Mac one evening, he said that it would be nice if Riddle ran the hotel on his own. She was quite capable, given the right staff to help her. Long story short, I lent Riddle money to buy the hotel. Okay, I'll be honest. When I lent them to her, I did not expect a return at all, although she returned the ones I spent on her on the day of our meeting. The Riddle, in essence, was now my daughter. Well, that's how I treated her. It took convincing to convince her to take the money from me. In the back of my mind, I thought that if anything happened to me, Georgina and the children might well turn up. They didn't want to know me for years, so why the hell do I need money? Riddle and my brother were my only family now. Over the next year or so, Riddle renovated the hotel. Mac and Jenny gave her some leeway as she grew older, but they could not stay away from this place and often visited, presumably getting the same discount as me. Years passed, and I could not understand why Riddle did not get married. There were enough suitors around, although I rarely saw them, because when I arrived, the Riddle insisted that I hang around with her, even if I just went to the cinema or for a walk. It was after my 56th birthday that my brother announced that Georgina had died of cancer. I was surprised how hard it hit me. In fact, I thought I had no feelings left for her. But he cried that night, and several nights later. No, I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't want that bastard and my kids to see me cry over her. She ruined my life. I think Riddle was the only person who knew how upset I was. She could read me like a book, and it was to her that my brother sent the letter that Georgina's lawyer delivered for me. Dear Alan, I know that you must hate me, but I ask you to forgive me. I owe you an apology. You have no idea how sorry I am for what I did to you and for the mistakes I made in my life. I have to admit that I married you for the money. I didn't love you then. I was just looking for an easy life. You were the one who could provide it, and we had 3 wonderful children together. But then, Roger showed up. He showered me with compliments and promised me the moon from the sky. Roger had millions in the bank, and I'm ashamed to say it stuck in my head. Sorry, Alan, then only greed spoke in me. It took me a long time to realize what I had lost. There comes a time when you realize that money is not everything. There was never any love between Roger and me. The truth was that the only thing Roger really wanted that money couldn't buy, that I had, was your children. I feel disgusted with myself for taking them from you. I know that for this, you will never be able to forgive me. Alan, I know you won't believe me, but during our marriage, I fell in love with you. It took me years to realize what was missing from my life while I was with Roger. It was you. If I could live my life again, and we were together, I know I would die happy. And so I'm dying, sadly thinking only about you. You will never know how hard it is for me to accept that I have messed up my life and yours. Over the past few years, I have tried to write you this letter many times, but I never had the courage to send it. I wrote to our children about how I forced you to stay out of their lives. They are innocent. Please, I hope you forgive them if they find you. Goodbye, my love. Please forgive me my sins. Georgina. Damn, crap. That was all I could say. The woman I loved and who shitted me everywhere claimed that she had always loved me. What could I do? I knew deep down that I loved her, which is why it hurt so much when I heard that she had passed away. But forgive her? I don't think I'll ever be able to do this. A few weeks later, I visited Georgina's grave. I left the flowers and cried again. Heartbroken or not, I still regretted that she died. But life went on, and the pain of her death passed surprisingly quickly, much faster than the pain of her betrayal. Shortly before Christmas following Georgina's death, at Riddle's insistence, I took a week off during the hotel's quiet period before the holiday season began. Evening in the living room, Riddle. I hired a new girl to work behind the bar. In fact, I was surprised that I didn't see her in the dining room during dinner. Riddle doesn't have much staff, and usually the same employee served dinner to customers and ran the bar. Since I was the only person in the living room, I thought of striking up a conversation with her. She seemed a little reserved and for some reason didn't answer when I asked her name. She started talking about something else. I think I asked her name about 3 times during the conversation, and it became obvious that she was deliberately not telling me that. I realized that she was embarrassed to talk to me, so I left the bar and sat in my usual chair in front of the TV. To my amazement, she came and sat down next to me. I found her actions extremely strange. She felt uncomfortable when I talked to her, but when I left, she followed me. To be honest, I was just starting to wonder what kind of strange kid Riddle had hired this time when she walked into the bar. I stood up and Mystery came over and kissed me like she always did when we were dating. I noticed that the new waitress at the bar had also stood up. Stepping away from me, the Riddle asked, "Well, what do you think about her?" I was completely confused and didn't know what to answer. I must have looked pretty dazed, and Riddle noticed it. She turned to the girl. "You still haven't told him, have you?" The girl blushed and shook her head. "You are a stupid girl. Alan, this is your daughter, Ellie. She wanted to surprise you." Poor Ellie looked like she was waiting for the ground to open up underneath her. I was shocked that I didn't recognize her, but I haven't seen her for so many years. "Am I scaring you that much, Ellie?" "I didn't know what you would think. I just didn't know what to tell you." "Well, how about, hey, Dad? It's been a while since I last saw you, and maybe a hug would go well." Ellie stepped towards me and we hugged. I didn't see her face, but I felt that she was crying. "Stop this tearful flow, my girl. I'm tired of crying over the years. I missed you, Dad. We all missed you. You will never know how much we missed you. Do you understand that before your mother died, we all thought you were dead? Mark looked for you when he was old enough, but they told us you died. Mom and Roger told us that you died in a car accident." "They did that?" I think Roger wanted us to treat him like our father, although we have never done this. He was kind, very kind to all of us, but he was not our father. When we received the letters from the lawyer that our mother sent us, I didn't know how to approach you. I went to see Uncle Bob, whom I haven't seen since you and your mother broke up. He said Ashley is the person closest to you. So I contacted her. I wonder why Bob didn't tell me. He said that you became very strange when anyone mentioned us children. He thought Ashley was the right person to talk to. I am avant-garde. Tomorrow Marcus is flying out of Switzerland and will take Simone with him. You want to meet them. Of course I want to meet them. This is something I've dreamed about for years. I told you, Ellie, there's nothing to worry about. I know how much your father missed you. For years he viewed me as his adopted daughter, Riddle said. Now, perhaps, he will treat you like his daughter and begin to think of me the way I would like. I turned my head to look the Riddle in the eyes. Georgina's gone, Al, and it looks like you got your kids back. I can't replace their mother. I'm a little young for this, but I don't mind trying to get a job as your wife. Have you ever thought of me like that? It was too much for me. I felt delirious and my legs weakened, and I fell into a chair. Is it because of you or because of my words? Riddle asked Ellie. I think we both shocked him a little. Okay, let's face it. It would be great if your father and I got married while you all are here. I think I tried to say something, but Riddle and Ellie just ignored me and started making plans for our wedding. In the end, I managed to interject something about the age difference between us. That sucks, Riddle replied. You have been craving my body since the day we met, and you think that I don't see it. Forgive me, Ellie, but let's call a spade a spade. Years ago, Jenny told me that your age was bothering you, the difference between us. So I put the brakes on everything. But the older we get, the closer our ages are to each other, in percentage terms. I'm sure Ellie will want more siblings before I get too old. This is a great idea for me, Ellie added. I think I'll call Uncle Bob and tell him to bring his whole family here for the wedding. I sat gasping for air. I felt my mouth opening and closing. I knew I wanted to say something to both of them, but I couldn't figure out what. On our wedding night, the Riddle turned out to be a virgin. But many happy years have passed since then. At 65, I'm starting to feel old, but my 5 children and 3 grandchildren keep me active and make me feel young. Of course, I don't drive trucks anymore, but I work in a hotel. Ellie and her husband live here with us. There are times when I wish I could tell Riddle how I felt about her all those years ago. Perhaps we could get married earlier. I'm very glad that she decided to take matters into her own hands. Age has always been a concern for me, but it was finally taken down by my son Marcus. One evening he told me, Dad, take your happiness then and where you can find it. I will always be there to watch over the Ridley whenever the need arises. But, God, that won't happen for many years. We've already lost so much time together. Life goes on. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.